Welcome, viewers, to my exploration of the collapsing shipwreck at Woody Point, Redcliffe, Australia, and the rich history behind this sadly lost opportunity. For this is no run-of-the-mill pile of jagged rusting iron, oh no. This wreck of the Gayundah that you see at Woody Point was in its heyday nothing less than the flagship of the Queensland Navy, presenting a menacing business-like aspect to front and an elegant profile. The redoubtable gunboat guarded the nascent, troublesome colony against potentially vast threats for many years from 1884, and then served the newly formed nation of Australia as late as World War I. It is gut-wrenching to see her consigned to this ignominious fate. I have visited her many times since the early 1970s, imagining her troubled career as a nation's flagship, but I shall walk over her no more. She is in a state of accelerating collapse, just from 2020 onwards. Let's start with just what Queensland was, and why she had her own navy. There was no Australia until 1901, but rather the separate transplanted European states of New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, with her own sort of empire in Northern Territory, Tasmania, you can see the map of Tasmania down there, Victoria, and whose people preen themselves that they are part of the salubrious eastern seaboard states, based entirely on this. Can you even see that tiny red coastline there? Well, this might help you see it. Yet that is why they expect eastern seaboard status, and expect you to disregard all this southern coastline in blue. You see, they are underneath Australia. They are, in fact, beneath Australia. The Jaguarite fearlessly names the elephant in the room yet again, and the vast state of Western Australia, transplanted European entities, increasingly surrounded by other European states doing the same thing. France, for example. France began the takeover of New Caledonia, in blue there, which she still possesses to this day. Portugal was consolidating her rule of Eastern Timor, held until 1975. Holland was strengthening her grip on the East Indies, nowadays called Indonesia. Much more disturbingly, Germany was grabbing a vast, sprawling empire in Melanesia and Micronesia, including northeast New Guinea, which she named Kaiser Wilhelmsland. Zooming out to take in the bigger strategic picture, France was gobbling up Indochina and had beaten China in a bruising war or two in doing so. The grand old man of colonialism, Portugal, still held Macau in China, and kept it until 1999. Spain, enfeebled by nearly a century of civil wars, still held the Philippines, soon to be lost to the USA in a war. Note at right, Germany seized Nauru, a household name in Australia nowadays. Although Britain kept an Australia station centred on Sydney, the ugly reality was those 6 pygmy colonial powers had to expect the British Navy to intervene from these faraway ports, Hong Kong, Singapore and Penang, and Russia was confidently spreading her wings across the oceans from her new bases on the Pacific, including Nagasaki, Japan. Yes, that does sound crazy in view of later events. Well, they did have a naval base there. This is the future Tsar Nicholas II in Nagasaki. He survived a sword attack on that trip, by the way, and got a tattoo. High up you can see Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, which Britain and France attacked in 1854 and got so badly defeated that the British admiral suicided at post. Note the colony of Russian America and the short-lived 3 Russian forts in Kauai, Hawaii. The short-lived colony at Fort Ross, California, where they actually encountered American troops. Russian naval activity upon the oceans was leaving the map peppered with Russian names on obscure islands, and France too had plastered names all over British Australia itself, cheekily even naming some things after Napoleon's family members. Indeed, the Russian Navy had even achieved the rare distinction of discovering a continent. Antarctica, that is. The honour went to Admiral Bellingshausen and his deputy Lazarev, commanding 2 sailing sloops, the Mirny and the Vostok, in this terrifyingly remote netherworld. Fun fact, in discovering a new continent, they beat Britain to it by 3 days. Yes, but let's return now to the 1880s and the budding Australian colonies. And adding urgency to settler anxiety, a Russian fleet visited them in 1882, 3 swift craft brilliantly handled by their crews. The flagship was the cruiser Africa, and the clippers Viesnik and Plastun. Their crews became the darlings of the socialite set in Sydney, Melbourne, Newcastle, Hobart, Albury, and of course Glenelg, under the command of the aloof, perspicacious, and hypersensitive Avrami Aslanbegov, an apostate former Muslim. There are still 12 countries in which you can be executed for converting away from Islam today. Aslanbegov challenged the seamen of these fledgling Australian states to races, which the Russians usually won, but one Australian crew of the Nelson pulled off a victory, that's them. The Russian officers were the toast of high society, attending balls and musical performances, just not Admiral Aslanbegov himself, though. This helped fuel the war scare, as some speculated that he might be just awaiting orders to attack, probably to seize coaling stations like Newcastle, and taking care not to become attached to Russia's intended victims. It was patently obvious that the powerful Russian squadron would be leaving when it felt good and ready to leave, since the fledgling states had poor navies, and everyone got the vapours over this. To be sure, there was an Australia station of the British Royal Navy under Commodore James Erskine, but it was patrolling 1/4 of the southern hemisphere, not just Australia. And yes, Victoria had a hairy-chested ironclad, the Cerberus, at just the time when the world was electrified over 2 showstopper performances by the radical new ironclad ships. One was the CSS Virginia and USS Monitor battle at Hampton Roads in the War of Northern Aggression, and also the rampage of the rogue Peruvian ironclad Huascar in the 1870s. Even Britain couldn't defeat the monster with the radical new torpedo. And Russia's brilliant victory at the Battle of Sinop, obliterating a Turkish fleet, had shown the world that wooden warships were finished. Only the new ironclad ships could stand up to the new exploding shells without catching fire, as the Turkish Navy did on its way to the bottom. Yet even ironclad armed Victoria was not above foolish expedients like this gun raft, likely more dangerous to its users than to its target. And although the New South Wales Naval Brigade looked splendid, they had given away their only ship recently, to Queensland in fact, and the race was on in every colony to beef up their rather bathtub navies into something that might fight off a Russian naval force at short notice. These are some of the ships they acquired. 2 types of ship predominated in their acquisition programs: gunboats, looking much like each other usually, and the radical new torpedo boats. Usually made in Britain, Queensland was no exception. In 1884 she acquired first the torpedo boat HMQS Mosquito, then 2 gunboats of the usual type, the Paluma and the flagship HMQS Gayundah. And this redoubtable old warhorse is just the same collapsing relic in Redcliffe that I set out to explore with you today. Queensland acquired a second torpedo boat, the Midgie, to bolster her existing Mosquito. And so, a short time after the acquisitions program began in 1884, they had the flagship Gayundah, an Aboriginal word meaning lightning. They had her sister ship, the Paluma, an Aboriginal word meaning thunder. They had the first ship, the Mosquito torpedo boat, and her sister ship, the Midgie, a name meaning an extremely small, swarming, biting coastal sandfly. They were good, sound warships. But Queensland was nervous about Russia and Germany, no less, and she had recently tweaked Germany's tail after all by attempting to seize southeast New Guinea, which created a frontier against German New Guinea, Kaiser Wilhelmsland, shown there in blue. The British masters pretty much puked over this and ordered Queensland to reverse this thrust into empire building forthwith. And then Britain annexed it anyway. In any case, I've always said that Queensland should realise her manifest destiny more by seizing these territories here. But it has been a lonely crusade, I must admit. You can see where the flagship ended up, but let's try to keep track of all Queensland's warships now, shall we? Gayundah, seen here, and Paluma packed a mighty punch, but Queensland went berserk, converting civilian ships into auxiliary gunboats, including the HMQS Bonito. She had the good grace to stray into a grainy photo, unlike several of her half-sister ships, and the HMQS Minor, which was built for the army, but soon pressed into naval service. Then there was the HMQS Otter, which was underarmed in her early stages, before she got the same mighty 64-pounder gun as the other gunboats. Now, much as I wanted to show you every one of our proud naval vessels in some original photo, 3 of the other 4 gunboats only ever got photographed in Davy Jones's locker, to my knowledge, so here goes, in no particular order, starting with auxiliary gunboat HMQS Dolphin, never photographed in life to my knowledge, Her Majesty's Queensland ship Stingaree, and the other makeshift gunboat was HMQS Brim. In truth, I can provide photos of them too, just not in their glory days, and you can check out the last 3 mentioned today at Tangalooma, the old whaling station on Moreton Island, east of Brisbane, where in the 1960s the government dumped them all for the benefit of recreational boaters. Here's the field of shipwrecks, but 16 years ago I was able to walk out to them. You see, the sand depths have become rearranged around them and the new coral formations. Now, if you were thinking that I made those last 3 ships look too big on this chart, then consider this. This is the HMQS Stingaree. Just cop that large pleasure boat for scale. Let's look at her from the water this time. Then again, let's just bulldoze all those other twisted rusticles out of the way and... now that's beauty. Very few of the Sybarites who paddle around these shipwrecks comprehend that they are seeing 30% of the old Queensland Navy. One of these ships is even underneath another ship. What a way to treat the mighty HMQS Dolphin herself. One which has emitted a hell of a lot of sand over her gunnels is HMQS Brim, also shown with pleasure boats in the picture to provide clear scale. And here are all 3 of these 19th century auxiliary gunboats. Am I the only one who finds this heart-rending stuff? But at least you really can go out to this real-life water world and see ships that are collapsing slowly. No one is going to say that about their flagship. If only I still had the film I took 34 years ago, in and on a structurally sound ship as it was then. So it's time to upgrade to real photos only. Voila! HMQS Dolphin, actual photo. And HMQS Stingaree, actual photo. And that brings us to HMQS Brim. And to finish on a high note, the other auxiliary gunboat, HMQS Pumba, actually did get photographed, so let's add her now. And there you have the entire Queensland Navy, printed out and frame it on your bathroom wall. But the pride of the fleet was always the gruesome twosome of Gayundah and Paluma, So now let's dwell on them in their heyday. Yes, let's dwell on my beloved Gayundah at last, while she is still with us. She's fast going, folks. Note the 6-inch gun at the rear. This is only the secondary armament, some of which are still preserved on land despite the derelict condition of the ships, a subject deemed worthy of scratch building by a Russian model maker. The real armament was the 203mm beast mounted in the front. When fired, it was quite capable of retarding the ship's forward progress in the water. She also boasted 4 primitive machine guns, including 2 quaint, wind-up Nordenfeldts. Machine guns had recently proven their worth in the Zulu War, and these Australian colonies certainly weren't being caught napping in the new technological revolution, what with machine guns and torpedoes and mines. You can still go to this dry dock at the Queensland Maritime Museum in South Bank Parklands. It houses a World War II frigate these days, as well as guns from the old Queensland Navy ships. Entertaining things happen here during great floods though, like the replica Dutch Duifken getting loose. Most Brisbaneites never noticed this splendid inner-city attraction. It was also used for swimming carnivals back then. It is noteworthy how much the great ship has inspired artists and model makers. This is far from an exhaustive collection of them. Wish I could show you the painting of her in full sail that used to be in the nearby hotel. Or this, the back cover of the 1986 Brisbane White Pages phone book. If you're wondering why a ship with engines and screw propellers would bother with masts and sails too, it's to keep their options open and conserve coal. The range of the ship was otherwise only good for going halfway up the long Queensland coastline. At the same time, in 1884, Queensland invested in a formidable defence asset, Fort Lytton, which is still there near the Ampol refinery. You can still see the mighty disappearing guns that popped out of a pit to fire. The fort guarded the mouth of the Brisbane River with a network of mines, or submarine torpedoes as they were called. Here's a later view of that minefield from the fort. HMQS Minor again, with mines all down her sides waiting for deployment. The annual Easter encampment for Queensland's enthusiastic little army. 100 years later, until 2018, Fort Lytton bore witness to entertainment spectacles by reenactment societies, often resulting in delightfully incongruous situations, like, did this cameraman really have to catch the supertanker in his Napoleonic photo? For incongruous situations, it's pretty hard to improve on this battle where Russians defend the fort against attacking Australians, bringing to life a real incident in the 1919 Russian Civil War, which had some Australian intervention in it. Yes, it amounts to Russians, perversely enough, manning Queensland's defences against invading Australians. But in the 1890s, I really think that a Russian force would have simply marched overland to attack it from the rear, like used to happen to China's coastal forts like Dagu, twice. Queensland's short-lived navy was fated never to get a fight in, but it was not all plain sailing or steaming. The flagship Gayundah, this grand old dame you see here, hosted the first ever naval mutiny in Australian history. But please banish any thought of hard-bitten sailors making their officers walk the plank, then turning their floating republic loose against the decent society that had failed them. No, not this time. This is one occasion when a mutiny was pulled by the captain himself, while the crewmen looked on with all the enthusiasm of bikers at a chick flick marathon with all vegan catering. Captain Henry Townley Wright did this. He gloried in 3 official titles in Queensland service, and Queensland was getting something good, a badass veteran of 2 recent wars, both of them service on the land. Most recent of these was the 9th Kaffir War. No kidding, it really was called that, in what is now South Africa. The other war was a punitive expedition in Perak, nowadays in West Malaysia. This latter service has been the cause of some confusion on the internet. someone accessing the Trove online newspaper morgue, researching articles printed back in 1884 about Queensland's beefed-up naval forces, has muddied the waters a bit. An object lesson for those who do it the easy way and read the left-hand column instead of the actual newspaper page on the right. He has mutated that Perak War into the Peru expedition. Well, that sounds like the best thing a naval commander could have had on his resume at that date, for the British ship sent to Peru had fought that rogue ironclad Huascar, remember I mentioned her, in a rare naval battle, and fired torpedoes for the first time in world history. Not many commanders could boast battle experience naval. Huascar beat off the British attack, and you can still see her today in Chile, the country that eventually captured her. But alas, Henry did not fight in Peru. It was clearly Perak, and thus his combats had all been on land, with machine gun and rocketeer units of the Naval Brigade. That was still very suitable background for a colonial navy though, and as you can see here, Henry had been mentioned in dispatches for his meritorious service in the Perak punitive expedition. He deserves credit for keeping the Queensland warships in good fighting trim, well exercised and proficient, although he should have curbed the ill discipline of some Gayundah crewmen in this Kangaroo Point neighbourhood. There were complaints at the time about their behaviour. But none of that is what people remember about Henry Townley Wright. Fate decreed instead that he should be remembered for his risibly unspectacular, unsuccessful mutiny aboard this very ship in 1888. Things began going sour for the naval commandant in 1887 when his overspending alarmed the government. Correspondence was exchanged between him, his office was an earlier building on this exact site, and the colonial secretary in the old government precinct a short distance away where the QUT campus now is. Our story will bring us back to this government precinct soon enough. As much as he may have run a tight little navy, the government was more concerned with how much he was spending. Across the river from his office, he also oversaw the naval stores buildings, which sadly were devastated by fire 99 years after this affair. We're back to that neighbourhood of Kangaroo Point that I mentioned earlier, and you see here the naval stores buildings that were newly completed at the time of the 1888 mutiny crisis. Their old charm is now smothered in the Cotton Wool Society's trappings. Here's the slipway that Queensland Navy ships used to be hauled up onto for servicing at this point. The government took issue with Henry Townley Wright overspending his allotted limits and imposed a formal ban on his buying any stores, except through the paymaster, Mr. Pollock. Whatever stores Senior Naval Officer Wright was buying, the real problem was his personal extravagance, far outstripping his £600 per year salary, and this undischarged bankrupt had brought gambling debts with him when he arrived from Britain. He soon racked up a debt for alcohol alone of a hideous £165, or 2 years' wages for a common man. There had been a series of legal precedents set lately. Sir George Tryon, the Admiral of Britain's Australian station, had reluctantly held court-martial in the case of the Gayundah's second-in-command, Lieutenant Hesketh, but he was stuck with doing this because the Queensland government had campaigned hard to get the British white ensign, as you see there, onto the flagship Gayundah, and those whom it suited claimed that this made them subject to British naval justice only. This is the white ensign, and this is what Gayundah would have looked like flying it, and this is what Henry Townley Wright thought it looked like. For 2 years, the legal status of Queensland Navy officers had seesawed between autonomy and nestling in the British Navy's bosom. Ironically, a seaman had been accused of mutiny lately, yet Henry himself stopped it from going to the Royal Navy level and just punished it at the local level. By the time the heat was on Henry himself, It was impossible to predict which way the pendulum would swing in any given example. The gloss was wearing off Henry Townley Wright rapidly. When the fleet exercised northwards up the coastline, he splashed out moneys for hotel rooms on the land, forsaking his cabin aboard the Gayundah. We're talking £89 here. By all accounts, she was quite a cramped accommodation for 55 men to live aboard, and what with one of them being kept under arrest at that. But for God's sake, Henry was a veteran of the 9th Kaffir War. He should have been comfortable with the uncomfortable. But then he had omitted to mention that he was an undischarged bankrupt who had given up paying his creditors in faraway Britain for 2 years now. Nor were they very keen on him furnishing his house with the Gayundah's crockery and using crewmen as domestic servants.
The crazy captain of the Gayundah, Henry Townley Wright, gets up.
The senior naval officer's creditors caught up with him. He had a cash flow crisis and attempted to book leave merely to get 3 months' pay in advance. This, coupled with his brazen breaches of the spending restrictions, made him about as popular as irritable bowel syndrome, and the government moved swiftly to sack him. Much as he enjoyed invoking the protection of the White Ensign, foolishly obtained for him by the Governor and the Premier, this crisis struck at the worst moment to be looking up to them. Governor Musgrave had died only 2 weeks earlier, and Henry Townley Wright had been in his funeral cortege. And the Premier, McIlwraith, was seriously ill. Thus the men who had a history of seeing the validity in Wright's case were absent. In vain did Henry now reach for the same arguments, but yes, he did grope around for this lifeline. In the legal battles over the court-martial of Lieutenant Spencer Hesketh, charges so dead-set identical to those against Henry himself as to look like a bad retelling, and also in the matter of that unnamed violent mutineer, both Captain Henry Wright and the authorities had succeeded in swinging dizzily across both sides of the controversy, which only served to forearm the other side in how to play it the next time. Now he went up against a colonial secretary, the acid-tongued Mr. Boyd, Dunlop, Moorhead, who would brook no nonsense. He found time, while saying the words you see here on screen, in Parliament that same day, to order Captain Wright to hand over command of the Navy, with serene disregard for the ongoing controversy over jurisdiction. And just to show how the gates were everywhere slamming across Captain Wright's options, they made this guy Premier of Queensland several weeks later. And when he learned that Captain Wright had not only stayed put while on approved leave, but had defied orders and purchased about 35 tons of coal, all piled onto flagship Gayundah, and lots of food too, he presented Captain Wright with a fait accompli, and ordered him to surrender command to Lieutenant Francis Pringle Taylor, who carried out his unenviable task with alacrity.
I'm Commander Arvid Harbinger. I'm running this show.
I'm sorry, Commander. Presidential orders. Lieutenant Harley and I are in charge now. Any questions?
Captain Wright had been wrong-footed. Most likely his plan was to cut loose clear out of Queensland waters and present his ship to the British Admiral Tryon, where he believed he belonged. But with the government stealing a march on him, just when he had been in mid-march stealing mode himself, he still had one card to play. How dare a mere lieutenant go over a commanding officer's head? He arrested the hapless Taylor for gross insubordination. Legally, it really was a go-either-way situation. There was no telling how it could turn out. Time was not on the captain's side, and in the end it was going to be settled by force of arms and force of personality. Captain Wright had shown that he was not checkmated after all, but then neither was the Queensland government. This ship was a notoriously cramped place to be under arrest, so it's just as well the lieutenant was not under close arrest, but he was now out of the equation and powerless to stop the ship busting out to freedom. As if the lineup of personalities was not already bad enough for Captain Wright, Moorhead brought in the police commissioner, David Seymour, an authentic hard man in the Victorian age's finest traditions, who cut through the juridical schools of thought about white ensigns and stuff and just pulled together a force of 20 police marksmen. They marshalled in Edward Street, and he marched them into Queen's Park to outflank the flagship at her moorings. Few Brisbaneites know it today, but there are actually 2 public parks at this point, and the action happened not in the Botanical Gardens but Queen's Park, which is little more than a part of the ring road these days. You pass the Edward Street landing at this point, where Captain Wright stopped his own 2IC from coming ashore. Crowds watched as they marched past the ancient artillery pieces, and the 20 men took up positions facing the rogue flagship, which must have been just where those white masts are now. Don't they look the part? The ship's crew were caught unawares, going about their tasks, but then Captain Wright expected them just to obey, not to take part in defying the government themselves. Just as well, their machine guns would have made Swiss cheese of those constables. Like an exemplary captain at the helm, Captain Wright remained a picture of calm throughout. The flagship was anchored in her usual location when not travelling, which was between the naval stores and the Botanical Gardens, as shown in this old postcard. Many trees and hedges have grown since 1888, but you can still see Parliament House's verdigris-coated roof, if you look hard enough through the green. Captain Wright sure saw it, and as his options began slamming shut before him, he asked Gunner Blake on the rear 6-inch gun, "If I asked you to fire on Parliament House, where would you aim?" The gunner replied, "About amidships, sir." Would he really have done it? Would these men face execution for treason over a cause so narrowly personal for the captain, yet irrelevant to all of them, except when he might be using them as servants? Let's bring back that postcard for an idea of what a clear shot they would have had back then. Something which needs to be said about that splendid Parliament House. It's the only one I've ever heard of that had its own torpedo boat. Yes, HMQS Mosquito was based in a slipway of Parliament House. But Mosquito played no part in the developing crisis. Police and flagship faced off against each other for a long, tense interval, to the delight of the growing crowd of spectators. And suddenly the police commissioner, along with Lieutenant Francis Pringle Taylor, confronted the captain aboard his flagship. We are fortunate to have a surviving political cartoon from the Figaro, whose arrangement evokes HMS Pinafore, if anything.
Stick close to your desks and never go to sea. And you all may be rulers of the Queen's Navy. Stick close to your desks and never go to sea. And you all may be rulers of the Queen's Navy.
I wonder whether the 1888 readership would recognise the effete man placed among the ladies. No mistaking this name. Lieutenant Taylor, dressed to impress. Manacles, reflecting Captain Wright's frequent keeping of men under arrest on shipboard. And, in the ultimate indignity that Victorian Britons could possibly imagine, removed by force by the police while exercising high command of the Navy aboard his flagship. With the enemy inside the very gates, Captain Wright gave in, released Lieutenant Taylor from arrest, and went quietly with the police. Queensland had a new Navy commander, while Henry Townley Wright disappears from history. Both sides had been on legally solid ground. but trying to explain this concept to such a fixed bayonets and charge old-school men like Commissioner Seymour, the man who sent the black trackers to destroy the Kelly gang, could be relied on to pan out like this.
I get my orders from a higher source. Shut up, asshole.
As I said, the ill-starred Henry Townley Wright vanished off the pages of history, although if I've learned anything about the darker side of Queensland, I would suggest the Swains Reefs are a good place to start searching. Never mind. As I said, the Queensland Navy never got a fight in, and Queensland's army was pretty sparingly deployed too. They weren't sent to any war until the Great Boer War. In southern Africa, in just a century, these convict colonies had become miniature great powers. Fighting wars in faraway countries, New South Wales led the charge, sending a force of over 700 men to fight the Mahdi in the Sudan, Africa, a Muslim uprising with many similarities to the ISIS phenomenon of recent times. Contrary to myth, the New South Welshmen were much praised and appreciated by the British in Sudan, and even mentioned in dispatches, as this obscure 1890s book cheerfully told. All of the states sent forces to fight in the Boer War in southern Africa, like the South Australian and Western Australian and Tasmanian troops, but in 1900 Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia sent forces to the Boxer Rebellion in China, a violently xenophobic martial arts movement, stupid even by martial arts standards, attacked everyone foreign in China, and Chinese who worked for foreign devils. China's government joined the Boxers in one of the low points in the history of human thought processes, for already the Boxers were in the process of being squished by the 8 greatest powers on Earth. Or should we say 11? This and the next 5 photos show the troops from Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia who served in the Boxer Rebellion. This photo and the next 3 show South Australia's HMCS Protector, a sturdy veteran of the Boxer Rebellion. These are crewmen of her who were given the China Medal, and here's a sketch they made of their China Theatre of Operations. And yes, you can see the great ship today. In World War II, the Americans towed her to North Queensland as a somewhat desperate expedient, but she broke loose and got grounded at Heron Island. She's still there, folks. That early turreted ironclad Her Majesty's Victorian ship Cerberus rests today in stately spookiness. And let's not forget that Gayundah did have a less stormy sister ship, the Paluma. It was usually a simple matter to tell them apart. Paluma mostly didn't sport the rear gun, so she could do survey works for the British Navy, another reason why Captain Wright did have some sort of point about confusing jurisdictions operating here and whether they belonged under Royal Navy control or not. And then came the Great Flood of 1893, which was so enormous it made the 2011 Great Flood look like a puddle. If you doubt it, look at these markers here at the naval stores.
Forget 1893? Oh, look up. Alright. Oh shit.
Here is a similar set of Great Flood markers in Eagle Street. They don't have anything to show the 2011 level here. So what does this much rage of Mother Nature look like on the ground? That's the Paluma and 2 other large ships high and dry in the Botanical Gardens during that Great Flood. How the hell could several hundred tons of ship with no apparent point of balance be lifted up and moved away again? It was boggling their minds. But Mother Nature intervened, and 2 weeks after the shock of the Great Flood, she sent another Great Flood, which lifted the ships clear and thereby ended Russia's sudden hopes of ruling the 7 seas. And on the first day of the 20th century, the real first day, that is the 1st of January 1901, the 6 colonies federated into a new nation, Australia. And most colonial naval ships went into the Royal Australian Navy under a new flag. See how Her Majesty's Victorian ship Countess of Hopetoun becomes HMAS Countess of Hopetoun in the background. South Australia's Protector steamed off to war again as HMAS Protector to seize Germany's empire in New Guinea. In 1914, the redoubtable HMAS Gayundah, after having her bow heavily changed, that's why when she got beached eventually she had that massive sperm whale head look about her that is at odds with most of the photos you've been looking at. And her rear gun got shipped off to deepest, darkest Canberra. Well, she did actually fire on foreign vessels fishing illegally off northwestern Australia before World War I. She secured a place in the record books by being the first ship to communicate with the land by wireless, which sounded a lot more awesome in 1903 than it does now, admittedly. That's what you're seeing in both this painting and the picture before it. But after World War I, it was time to admit that the old warhorse was obsolete, and she became a civilian gravel barge. So did Paluma, and in the 1950s she was broken up for scrap. Then, in 1958, the Redcliffe City Council purchased Gayundah and dumped her on the beach at Woody Point to prevent wave erosion of that cliff there. But now that she has crumbled away to this, I strongly recommend you don't get a room in one of those apartment blocks at the top of that cliff that she was protecting all that time. When she was a coherent ship, I used to love climbing up to the rear gun deck and walking through her interior, but now that she looks like this, please banish any thought of climbing up onto any part of her.
Well, these are fragments of the Gayundah, and I want to show you why you do not go climbing that ship. You put your weight on it. What's your weight? You put your weight on that. This ship is not going to take your weight. Don't climb the shipwreck anymore.
Now, what about HMQS Mosquito, torpedo boat, first ship ever acquired by Queensland? Wasn't she sleek? Let's see what became of her. Remember that slipway at Parliament House?
Well, there's the new Parliament House, which aligns with the old one. This is pretty much where that slipway would have been. Forget it. Gone. No, there's mangrove. Mangrove. You'll be remembering that because that's just where HMQS Mosquito is these days, in mangrove.
The sad truth is that Mosquito met with an even more ignominious fate than Gayundah did. In 1913, the government simply dumped her in a swamp like a sack of trash, like thieves in the night. In 1966, an intrepid man squelched through the mangrove mud until he found her. This is her elegant bow section, and the spreading debris field there of her body. She does not look like that anymore, I can tell you true.
Well, the British in Malaya used to say you can't go through mangrove. It was impassable. The Japanese, on the other hand, figured out that all you have to do is stand on these chutes and listen to the crunch. And you just crunch down, dissipates your weight, you don't sink into the mud. Just make sure there are such chutes everywhere you're walking. And maybe a little pointlessly, I just want to observe that a fugitive would be able to lose his pursuers in here. Turning around, do you see the tracks I left? Wow, not at all what I expected. Yeah, if you're going to do this for yourself, make sure you're fine with Australia's spider and mosquito population. Maybe you've heard of bird-eating spiders before, but look what this fucker's got. Yeah. Can you tell that's a dome web? Did someone tip a beer Let's throw a can of beer in there with one hole in it? What? What a wondrous netherworld the mangroves are. Rejoice, we conquer. Probably.
This, viewers, is the historic 1st Queensland warship, torpedo boat 2nd class HMQS Mosquito, once captained by Francis Pringle Taylor himself. Now, despite total lack of anywhere to stay aboard the tiny ship, be thankful these torpedo boats never got a fight in, as the crew were hopelessly exposed to rifle fire. In recent times, the Queensland Museum explored the same debris field, and they claim to have salvaged some pieces, which I doubt they will put on show. They weren't there the last time I visited. I do declare, this and this are no way to treat a lady. These ships were ready to fight Russia and Germany, no less, for us, yet they have been denied a glorious retirement, like so many other ships have been given as floating museums. So please get on over to Woody Point and farewell this mighty guard dog of old Queensland.